Okay, so friend of mine, Tom Karrel, thank you for coming and sitting down and talking with me today.
Absolutely.
So you've been living a pretty interesting life. We both studied at Tulane for a bit together. You were a couple years ahead of me, but why don't you fill me in on a bit of what you've been doing since then?
Yeah. So, yeah, Sam, I knew you from undergrad at Tulane. After that, I've been doing a little bit of research and work abroad throughout college, and then after that, I did a master's in public health program at Tulane.
Hmm.
So I studied international health and community development and an international framework for about a year and a half, and then since then in Uganda, actually in East Africa. So I've been based out with two different organizations in Uganda, one for about 6 months, and then the one I'm working with now for the last year and a half, doing kind of all different aspects of community development, whether it be research, kind of direct program implementation, and now a lot of what I'm focusing on is actually developing curriculum for cross-cultural learning. So how to engage populations in the United States and students in the United States with folks in Uganda and Rwanda specifically, and how you create those spaces for people to have conversations around social issues and development, both in the United States and in East Africa. So that's a lot of the kind of specifically the work I do. It's taken me in different directions, and it's been very interesting and fun, and met a lot of cool people through it.
That sounds awesome. It really does. What's your time been like? Because I know you've been away for 2, 3 years now, kind of thing. And the relationships you've built with you have great friends as well. I know that you're very supportive, and your family as well. What's it been like to be on your own, so far from home and doing your thing?
Yeah, totally. No, yeah, I really appreciate that. It's definitely been, a test. Like this isn't the easiest option if you're someone who really wants to connect in person with your family constantly and those kind of things. Like there's definitely personal reservations to it. I think in some ways, it's actually brought me closer to certain people because I think
Mm,
it requires a bit more intentionality with keeping in touch with folks, and calling in family, and texting that friend you haven't talked to in a couple of years just to check in. It requires a lot more of that. I'm lucky that this isn't 50 years ago, and now I have this magical phone in my pocket that'll put me in touch with you and different
right.
people. So that definitely makes it easier. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I do get to see my family a couple times a year. My dad was just out here to visit, which was cool. So the world feels a bit more connected than it used to. So that helps. But yeah, you miss certain things here and there, a birthday or an event stuff like that. But I do make my rounds, and yeah, I think if anything, it's allowed me to set time each day to check in with different friends, which I found actually to be really beneficial.
That's really nice. I'm glad to hear that. Um,
Yeah.
with the community there, what do you find as major differences between because you have a friend group there as well now. What's different between your friends group at home and the way you communicate with the people you've met there?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, a couple things. I mean, the benefit of being in Uganda, or one of the benefits of being in
Sure.
Uganda, is that the national language is English. So that definitely
Mm,
helps. I mean, if you're in a country like, Mozambique or Madagascar, you're speaking Spanish or Portuguese or French. So being able to communicate for the most part in English here is really helpful. And through that, what I kind of pride myself on actually is that the majority of my friend base here and community is actually Ugandan, both coworkers and just personal relationships, which I really, I like that aspect. But I do have a pretty big expat friend group as well. So on that base, it's nice to occasionally connect with Americans and other folks from abroad that are working here, because maybe there's a more of that piece of being able to directly to relate to someone with personal experiences in the U.S. I mean, I even have a close friend here who I grew up with. My girlfriend here is from Tulane as well, so
really?
kind of
Yeah.
some linkages there. But yeah, I'd say some of the differences is like a lot of my Ugandan friends are really awesome people, and they're really used to growing up in a culture and society that is very tight knit.
Hmm.
So whether you're in really rural Uganda or in Kampala, where I'm based, in like a super urban setting, there's more, in my opinion, there's more like overall community cohesion where if you show up at a friend's house and just like sporadically, like they'll make dinner for you and like invite you in, and it's very open in that regard. So that's really great. But yeah, there's definitely some cultural nuances and things, and it's taught me to refine my accent and enunciate better and things. So hopefully I'm not mumbling right now, but little things like that has been helpful, and there's little cultural differences here and there that are kind of funny, and you end up joking about them. But No, it's cool. In my opinion, it's cool to share those stories because, as I learn every day, so much about Uganda continuously, even after a couple of years, it's nice to kind of share the stories about the U.S. with friends here.
So I was just about to ask you for I bet I'm not the most ignorant person in America when it comes to Uganda, but I still don't know very much. And what I do know is depressing and hardship stories. So, what's it like for these people to understand that community and their national story and kind of reflect on that? Because what I've seen from the people you're with is they're all smiles, they're happy to be with you, they're very jovial people, but that's very um, juxtaposed from the story we hear of that country.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for bringing up that question. That's like kind of a lot of the base of, excuse me, a lot of the work that we're doing is actually kind of unpacking that question and trying to sort of change that conversation specifically between the U.S. and but one example our always give it really resonates with me. Speaking of our connection in New Orleans, when a friend of yours goes to New Orleans, you get psyched. You're talking about beignets, like, oh, Jazz Fest, Mardi Gras, like best city ever, culture. Yet to flip it, like, you don't really talk about the race issues in New Orleans and the
Absolutely.
gentrification and the
Yeah.
crime, the corruption and all these pieces that still exist in New Orleans, the beautiful city that it is. But albeit it does have some systematic issues. When you come to Kampala, Uganda, the first question you get is, are you safe? Are you going to get, Ebola? Are you working at an orphanage? What are you building? Yet you have a really vibrant culture here. And, in my opinion, one of the most incredible landscapes, environments, and overall topography of any country I've ever been to. So that's really interesting. And unpacking that I think is an important notion because we do have these assumptions. Like we hear, one story about something that happens in the Congo, and then all of a sudden we think the entire continent of Africa, you know, has a conflict going on for 10 years. So, unpacking that is interesting. But to your question, I mean, Uganda definitely has its issues. I mean, its overall, GDP and economy is significantly lower than a lot of the high income nations, like France, the UK, and the US and China. So there's definitely a lot of rural areas, a lot of millions of people in this area in this part of the world that are still living in some forms of poverty, and especially outside urban areas. That being said, I think people will be really surprised when they come to Uganda. It looks different infrastructurally, but I live in Kampala, which is this massive metropolis with skyscrapers and bars, and I can go get a brick oven pizza down the road, and it's really not what you'd expect in a lot of ways, and more specifically about the culture and the people. You have a really vibrant community, a deep-rooted culture. Way before it gained independence in 1962, you have hundreds of years of culture. So it's just a really interesting place, and yeah, it definitely looks different. There's things like malaria and HIV certainly exist as stagnant problems still, yet there's a lot of good happening amongst them. And, to finish off this little tangent, I think news also portrays it in a very, particular way. So, if you look at all the data right now in terms of malaria, HIV rates and prevention, and a lot of, clean water, a lot of the work that Bill and Melinda Gates are doing, the UN, a lot of the data, millions of people are escaping poverty every day to improve their lives. They're joining higher income brackets. So, there's a lot of good that's happening. So I guess to tie that all together, it's not exactly what people may think. So I appreciate the question.
Focusing more on the mental health aspects of the community, I find it interesting that it's very communal based. It sounds like as well in the urban as well as the rural areas. Some part of America lacks that, in a lot of parts of America. And I feel like that would be very helpful for the mental health aspect of our communities as well. Do you think that there are any, not necessarily programs, but institutions that exist there that could come back to America or be useful guideposts for us?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's actually a really good question. Um, yeah, definitely. It's definitely interesting to work in an environment and community that I think overall has a lot more cohesion and interconnectedness. That being said, there's still a lot of issues that can be talked about in the space of mental health in Uganda. a lot of other countries in the region. I think more on a level of the stigma around it or lack
Hmm.
of knowledge around it. I think even in the US, it's still becoming an issue that in a lot of ways is just scratching the surface in terms of folks being comfortable talking about it and being open about it and getting access to some of those services, even on a basic level. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting question. I think in some ways, I can't really speak to specific data or anything on this,
Sure.
but I have to believe that a lot of the, at least on a family level,
Hmm.
in my opinion, like the key to, positive, whether you call it happiness or just well-being or whatever, the key, in my opinion, is really just strong relationships and having people around you that you can depend on and be with you. Even if you're someone who likes to be alone, like you need that community around you, in my opinion. So I think that definitely plays into it like really well. That being said, in Uganda, one big issue is that there's not a lot of daylight in people's minds between someone who's healthy and then someone who has a serious mental condition, such as
Really?
schizophrenia
Okay.
or some other issue like that. So there's not a lot of daylight on a broad scale between that, where especially in a lot of rural areas, if you're considered to have mental health issues, then you might just be referred to, like a mental institution or something. Whereas, you might just need to have a proper conversation with,
Right.
even a generalist in the mental health space. So I think that daylight, that area is something that, there's a lot of good organizations in Uganda that are doing a lot of work in that space, but it's definitely something that I see as a gap in mental health. And I think that goes along with sort of the general stigma where, the idea that everyone on the planet, in my opinion, like needs to have a conversation about what they're thinking about. Sometimes in a negative space, like, everyone goes through struggles and difficulties. So I think it's definitely something that can grow in Uganda where, figuring out how we create more unique spaces and communities, whether it's in Kampala or different parts of the country, how do we create those spaces for people to have those conversations? Especially you're talking about Uganda, which has either the second or the first largest refugee population in the world now. So you have these massive refugee settlements in northern and western Uganda where, a lot of support in the mental health space is going to be needed in the long term. So that's definitely something that Uganda will need to work towards.
I find that very interesting that the space is almost less between the normal mental cognition of somebody and the expression of hardcore mental illness. Because in America we're inundated with, for lack of a better word, bullshit. It's everything is superfluous and image oriented. But when I think of life in Africa, I think of struggle. I think of the internal conversation that people must have just to get through the day. Um, it seems almost like people there have a larger understanding of um, thinking through a problem and having that problem be overwhelming to your life and to your day and to your safety. Um, and so I hope that there's a route there that allows people the understanding of, hey, in America and the rest of the world, the problems you're facing are really superfluous. But here, they're on the ground, they're in your face. Um, I find that very, very fascinating. Do you have
Yeah.
any more to say on that at all?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I think it's an interesting conversation, and I think it's not to downplay the struggles of millions of people in this
Sure.
part of the
No,
world. But
absolutely.
no, but to that being said, I mean, to my earlier point, like the people of Uganda are improving and increasing their livelihoods in ways that a lot of people don't realize, and
Hmm.
a lot of the country is moving in a really positive and rapid direction. And I think to your point, I think you bring it down to a human level, right? Like as a person, like what do you want? Food on the table, you want shelter, you want a family around you and friends and the occasional night out with your buddies and an ability to, go out in the town or travel a tiny bit or, whatever. A little bit of flexibility outside those basic needs. So I think once you break it down to that level and consider the fact that, I'd say, based on the data, about six out of 7 billion people 6 out of the 7 billion people on this planet have theoretically a lot of those basic needs. Once that's kind of shoot away, I think it really breaks down to the community aspect, in my opinion, and having people around you. So I think you know it's something that used to surprise me a lot, but it's something that I'm seeing. It's like, huh, like what really drives our mind and our mental health, because in the US, objectively, the majority of the country has those basic needs set. Like it's not really a doubt whether you're able to access clean water, and basic healthcare. um, that being said, there's a lot of different things at play in our society now, like the educational system and healthcare system, and the political space that could also create mental health issues. So I think we're just kind of, I say overall the U.S. and Uganda comparatively are just kind of on different levels in terms of the average base resources. But you know, I think the propensity to fall into maybe a negative mental state exists almost in the same level in any part of the world.
Sure.
Um, excluding the extreme circumstances of natural disasters in warm toward areas. I think that if that answers your question a bit, I think that I'd say that um, would be something I could respond with, and just say that I've kind of learned, once you have those basic like check boxes marked in your life, I think, um, and you really feel fulfilled, I think what your environment looks like doesn't actually matter so much.
Hmm. That's very interesting. I like to hear that a lot as well. It gives you a lot of hope for so many people out there. Because, like you're
Totally.
saying, mental health especially is we all have a mind. We're all thinking. We're all trapped in there at all times.
Right.
And so to differentiate yourself as someone struggling with a day-to-day mental gymnastics rather than a hardcore mental illness, is something that
Right.
everyone should really come to think of as not super far off, but at the same time, um, something that we can all um, we can recognize as other humans are just trying their best as well. Things are hard, and when you're stuck in your
Totally.
head, um, makes it way more hard. So I have a
Totally.
question.
And
Go
yeah.
for it. No, go for it. What were you saying?
No, I know. I think that's a great point. My last thought on it was that, like, I think it's important with mental health is sometimes to break it down to like individual examples in your own life. Like, I have a couple friends in New York or San Francisco that are thriving objectively, but maybe aren't living the lives that they want to, or things like that. And that's just kind of a loose example. I don't have any specific people in my life like that, but I might have individuals that I know in a city like Hong Kong that are thriving and working a really high end job and have a fancy car and all these things. And someone in one of the areas I work in Uganda who has objectively a lot less, but I think is one of the happiest people I know, and is really a community model in terms of just leadership. So I think that's an important notion, is to really break it down to folks, because at the end of the day, I think we've kind of established that overall material goods to a certain happiness, unless you have a solid base. So I think sometimes in your own life, it's just realizing how controlling the mind can seem in terms of perceiving things in a negative way. And at the end of the day, you might be happier than you think. It's just how you kind of perceive the world around you, and also how your friends perceive the world. But anyway, I just wanted to go off that point because I think it was a really good one.
Absolutely. And I have a question about you returning as well. So you've learned this. Everything's new in your life for the last 2 years, essentially. You've been thrown into a whole new world. And it's vastly different than the world you grew up in. So I'm wondering, what are the major takeaways that you like? You seem like you're thriving as well over there, and I'm so happy for you. What are you going to bring back to the States when you do ever come back, or just go forward in your life to stay level and stay sane, stay happy?
Totally. No, it's a really important question. It's something I've been asking myself for many years now as I've kind of taken this path. Um, no, I think generally speaking, this experience has definitely changed the way I have conversations overall. I was just with my dad a couple weeks ago in Uganda and Rwanda. He was visiting, and I think he was saying that, like, him and I are having really engaging and insightful conversations together. And I think we both kind of realized that I've been developing in a way that it's really helped change the way I have conversations more critically. So I think something I've been practicing is really want to keep in touch with friends and family, trying to ask more, I think, constructive and unique questions sometimes, and try and bypass some of the just how's life things, and checking in on checking in on specific things and being like, hey, are you enjoying this? Or you know you know asking questions of, like, what's the last, like, great book you've read, or what are you thinking about right now? what's really engaging you in life at this moment? Because I want to get more of those specific examples from my friends and community, because it's what I learn off of. If Sam, if you've created this amazing organization and space to have these conversations, I want to learn how you did that, why you did it, and how you're building on it, because that's something. I'm not going to start another men's health archive, but I'd love to take those principles and implement them in my life, because I think that's an important piece. And I've gotten better as I re-enter kind of in the U.S. over and over. I've gotten better at communicating about my experience, because some people, just don't know what I'm doing, which is totally fine. So I've gotten better about talking about what I'm doing a little more quickly and critically, which is, I think, helpful as well. And then finally, on a personal level, actually, meditation has become a
Awesome.
practice that's become really integral in my life. My really good buddy Max has been like a huge guider in helping me that, because he's been doing it for a couple of years now, and kind of picking his brain on it and finally getting into my daily schedule. 30 minutes of meditation every day for the last 2.5 months has become a really integral part of my life, and it's helping me dive into my mind a bit more and learn what a distracted mind can do for your mental health state. And it's really helped me a lot. It's really something that I'm looking forward to continuing on, hopefully for the rest of my life.
I'm very happy to hear that. Did you find it easy, like the learning curve of meditation, or did you find it a bit of a self struggle to get your mind clear, or still to get your mind clear?
Very, very difficult. Very difficult in the sense that I think I had the wrong expectations and mindset going into it, ironically. At first I thought it was going to be, I'd sit down and have this profound experience for an hour,
Hmm.
or it'd almost be this like psychedelic thing. Like I was like, why am I not having this profound moment? Which was, as you probably know, is so off.
Yep.
So it took a few tries to keep doing it. And then I started to meet people, and I actually met this guy when I was in Ethiopia earlier this year, who had a really profound, story about his journey through picking up meditation. And it took just that guy George to really frame it in a way that made it a little bit more accessible and simplify it, where it's, you're literally just almost doing nothing. It's less than you normally do. And that was tough. It's tough to spend 30 minutes or 10 minutes even, or however long a day, like per day, sitting down or sitting in a chair and doing less than you normally do.
Hmm.
Because especially, we're getting very glued to being on our phones or constantly talking to folks, or, doing whatever. It's tough nowadays to just really do nothing sometimes. So I think at first it was more like my expectations into it, but once I kind of got going, and had a few sits where I was just wrestling and kind of thinking about my mind. I mean, you realize, even if I consider myself a relatively calm person, yet, I spend 10 minutes and I'm trying to just focus on my breathing, and in 30 seconds I'm thinking about a meal I had a week ago. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like your mind is always racing, and
Yep.
that's fine. And it's just becoming more aware of that is profound in some ways.
Well, I'm very grateful for you to sit down with me today, Tom. Um, I think a major part of happiness that I've found, and it sounds like I find it interesting in the context of Uganda as well, because something I see from not only that country but that continent is overwhelming gratefulness for all they have. Um, and I'm grateful for you to be my friend and to have this conversation with you. But I really do think that if we just focus on what is good in life. I do that every minute, every time I wake up. I try to think of the 5 things that I'm grateful for. Because grateful people are happy people. Happy people are not grateful. Thank you so much for sitting down with me, Tom. Is there anything else you want to say before we close this out?
No, I mean, that's great. And Sam, I thank you for taking the time and letting me just come on and chat with you. It's been great to get back in touch. I've been kind of following what you're doing over social media and internet and things like that over a couple of years, but it's been great to reconnect with you over the last couple of months. And I'm really just happy for what you're doing. I know we shared a personal experience years ago that definitely played into a difficult time in the mental health for both of us, as we progressed through our lives. And it was a turning point for me in my life, and it was able to turn it into a really positive thing personally. And I'm
Hmm.
glad to see it, you were as well. And I know that Daniel would be incredibly proud of both of us and the paths that we've taken. It means a lot to keep connecting with you, and I appreciate the questions today, and I always love having these conversations, and I'm happy to do it whenever.
Open invitation to you, but whenever you want to chat, more than happy to.
Excellent, man. Well, I'm looking forward to growing my mustache again in November, even though most of my friends we're not fans.
They don't have to be friends. They just have to support you. That's what's important.
Perfect. Well,
All right.
thanks, Sam, and have a great day. It's been a pleasure.
You too, bud. Much love, and I'll talk to you soon, all right?
Thanks, man. See ya.